Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Happy New Year, Check Your Threadheads! How are you doing? I hope you're doing awesomely. So as I state rather emphatically at the beginning of this episode, I love the start of a new year. To me, it feels like a great opportunity to focus on any changes that you want to make to how you live your life. As you would have already seen from the title, this episode is all about goals related to sewing and sustainability. But of course, you may have hatched some for the other facets of your life. On top of my sewing related ones that I mentioned in the episode, I'm also keeping my vision board that I made recently close by. I don't want to lose sight of the other things that I determined are important for my near future. So we've just had that weird bit between Christmas and New Year's, betwixtmas as I believe it's sometimes referred to. Hopefully it provided you with a chance to get some sewing done. I managed to find a big chunk of time one day to sew, and I've finished up my Greta dungarees that I was making from a pair of thrifted curtains. I'm loving the finished garment. They have a kind of fine art student look. However, I feel that the cream colour of the curtains are giving them a kind of spring-summer vibe, so I can't really see myself wearing them at the moment. I'm looking forward to brighter weather though, so that I can figure out some outfit combos to wear them in. I've also managed to cut out and start a project for my daughter using a zero-waste pattern. I'm using the Zero Waste Cap T sewing pattern by Thread Faction to be precise. I look forward to finishing it up and reporting back for those of you who are interested in zero waste sewing in general and for children specifically. Any sustainability goals have kind of stalled recently. Oh, except I've been making a lot of potato rosties to eat because you can add all sorts of leftovers into the mix. I made a batch with the leftover Brussels sprouts and roast potatoes from our Christmas dinner recently, which were really tasty. We ate them with some chorizo that we got in a Christmas hamper and a fried egg on top. I don't really follow specific food accounts because cooking's not really my passion. However, I've enjoyed seeing some posts on Instagram showing some different ways people have been using up their festive leftovers. This week, Check Your Thread has been the grateful recipient of one lovely new patron via Patreon. Big thanks to Kate, who I've actually had the pleasure of meeting in real life. She has generously signed up to support the podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast in 2021 and want it to be a weekly feature throughout 2022, please consider becoming a patron. You can make monthly contributions of any amount at all. Please find out how via the link in the show notes or via the website checkyourthread.com or by going to patreon.com/checkyourthread to do so. Speaking of show notes, did you know that I make show notes for every single episode of the podcast? They include the links to the various people, businesses and other things mentioned in the episode, so you don't need to pause the episode and go and grab a pen if we're talking about something you'd like to know more about. And when relevant, the show notes include lists of the main points discussed, as well as some images so you can get a visual on what we're talking about. Find the show notes for each episode on the website checkyourthread.com. Right, so episode 23. It's a solo episode this week, made with a helpful dose of listener feedback. As we've mentioned, it's the start of a new year, so a great time to think about new habits you'd like to implement going forwards. I've collected a whole heap of goals related to sewing more sustainably that listeners intend to focus on during 2022, and I've thrown in some additional suggestions of my own. If you like the idea of setting goals or aims at this time of the year and could do with a dose of inspiration, or you just like thinking about sewing, then this episode is for you. Enjoy! So 2021 has been put to bed and we stepped into 2022. I don't know about you, but I absolutely love the start of a new year. I feel it offers the perfect opportunity to figure out how I want my life to look going forwards and the blank slate on which to build these new plans. So whether you think of them as goals, resolutions, promises, aims, intentions, pledges or something else, outlining specific actions or habits you want to implement can feel really powerful. So of course, I've been thinking about how that might relate to sewing and sustainability. For the purposes of this episode, I'm going to use the phrase goals because I've noticed that some people dislike the term resolutions. I've been thinking about what my goal will be, and recently I put a shout out via the Check Your Thread newsletter and Instagram account to find out what other people's intentions are for the new year. I'm going to share the goals that I've gathered plus some other ideas in case you want to make a goal or two of your own but require some inspiration. So have a listen and see if any of these goals resonate with you as something you might like to implement in 2022. Right, slow sewing. If you've looked back at your output over the last year or so and been a bit shocked by how much you've produced, you might choose to spend 2022 slowing down your sewing output a bit. This doesn't have to mean reducing the pleasure and enjoyment you get from sewing, it just means producing fewer finished garments. And taking longer to plan and produce each item will hopefully strengthen your connection with each piece. Previous guest Judith Staley, the creator of the Sew Over 50 community, who I spoke to for episode 12, has a goal along these lines. Judith intends to make less but make better this year. So what could that look like? A lot of you have been inspired by podcast guest Louisa Owen-Sonstrom. Louisa spoke in episode 15 about how we could all slow down the clothes making process whilst maximising the enjoyment by hand stitching garments, and a lot of listeners fancy giving that a try. But if sewing an entire garment by hand doesn't appeal, introducing hand stitching for some of the processes will give you the chance to slow down and relax while still pushing your project forwards. Hand stitching can give you more control at certain points of your project, like when you're inserting a lining. Plus, it can give you the opportunity to add some couture elements or invisible finishes that will make your garment extra special. Think hand-worked buttonholes or blind hems and so forth. But it's not only the construction that can be hand-stitched. If it's something you're into, consider adding embellishments by hand. That could be adding a simple trim or going all out and adding some beautiful embroidery to your garment project. When I was working on my denim shirt to Anthea blouse upcycle project a couple of months ago, I really enjoyed the points where I added the sashiko style stitching as a form of top stitching. It gave me points in the project where I could sit on the sofa with my family or enjoy watching TV while still making, rather than being tucked away in my sewing corner at the other side of the room. One more idea for implementing a slow sewing approach is to challenge yourself to make something more complicated or involved. Rather than busting out another jersey t-shirt project or something else that's firmly in your comfort zone, 2022 could be the year you finally get stuck into a jeans making project or a lined jacket or coat maybe. Perhaps you could alternate your projects between the quick fun sewing fixes and more challenging meatier projects. Taking more time to work on the fit of a garment slows things down whilst increasing the likelihood of the finished garment feeling wonderful to wear and therefore something you can't wait to reach for. And when my fabric scrap tubs start to overflow, I really enjoy working on a project that involves combining them to make the fabric before cutting out and constructing the actual garment. It's definitely more time consuming and the payoff is a truly unique garment that has the added challenge and enjoyment of effectively working on a patchwork project as well. Right, next goal. Questioning which fibres you sew with. As we've previously discussed on this podcast, no newly produced fabric can be considered entirely sustainable because they all require energy to process, produce, transport and so on. And all fabric production causes damage and waste to some degree. However, there are definitely some fabrics that will create less waste and damage than others. At Sona on Instagram's goal for the year is to think carefully about sustainable fabrics in sewing and ready to wear. That's a fantastic goal that really gets to the heart of what it means to sew more sustainably. To work out your own strategy to choosing more sustainable fabrics to sew with, I guess you'd need to start out by working out what attributes of sustainability related to fabric mean the most to you. Here's some examples of what that could look like. If you want to make sure that your garments will one day biodegrade and don't leach microplastics into the waterways when you wash them, then moving away from synthetic fibres such as polyester, nylon, acrylic and elastane is a good plan. Instead, you may choose to prioritise natural fibres such as cotton, linen, silk and wool, or even the semi-synthetic regenerated fibres such as viscose, rayon, tencel, cupro, modal and bamboo, most of which are derived from wood. If it's damage relating to chemicals that you want to avoid, then looking for organically grown cotton or regenerated fibres produced in a closed-loop system, such as tencel and cupro, might become a priority for you. Look for fabrics that are Oikotex certified to make sure that the fabrics and fibres you buy are free from chemicals deemed harmful to human health. Taking that one step further, by buying cotton fabrics with the GOTS certification, you're making sure that tightly controlled guidelines related to both environmental damage and the decent treatment of workers have been met at every point. You'll only find the GOTS certification on organically grown cotton. Fabrics that could be considered more sustainable might be those sourced second-hand, thrifted perhaps, or acquired via a de-stash sale or possibly a fabric swap event. And depending on where you live, perhaps you could look into locally produced fibres or textiles. @InAHaystack on Instagram is clearly taking this theme several or even 100 steps further and writes that their goal is trying to finally finish my growing clothes project, flax to linen. That's some real next level goal making and I applaud you. And whilst we're talking fibres, don't forget that these goals can also be applied to the threads you sew with. If you haven't already, please check out episode 20 called What Thread Should I Buy? That goes into the various thread choices available to garment sewers. One of my aims for 2022 is to slowly transition away from using 100% virgin polyester thread. Perhaps your goal is to only make things you'll actually wear. You may choose to focus on this if you often feel that, despite a wardrobe full of clothes, you have nothing to wear. @KittyMadeMe on Instagram has set the intention to sow my stash and only make garments that will get a lot of wear. I'll get back onto the stash bit later, but the goal to only make things that will see regular use is a fantastic one to keep in mind throughout the year. It's probably best to start by really drilling down on what you already wear the most. Those items are clearly the ones that fit your personal style and lifestyle requirements the best, so they can give you clues of what will be useful to make going forwards. There are a number of ways to work out what you already wear. Taking part in challenges like Me Made May will help you figure out which of your self-made garments feel good and pair well with the rest of your wardrobe, and which are outfit orphans or ones you don't enjoy wearing for other reasons. Alternatively, you could simply make a note or photograph your outfit each day and work out which are the items that get the most use. Another technique for this that I really like the sound of is to put all your clothes on one side of your wardrobe or clothing rail, and once you've worn something, hang it on the other side. The idea being that by the end of that period of time, the items left on the original side will give you a clear picture of what you don't need. I guess you'd need to do this at various points throughout the year to cover all the seasons, but I really like how easy to implement that would be without the need to remember to make a note or take a photo each day. Practically for me, that wouldn't work because I share a clothing rail with my husband, which is pretty jammed with both sets of clothing. But if you give this method a try, please let me know how you find the exercise. You could try a new technique or skill. Why not use the start of the new year as the push to try something that's interested you for a while, but you've yet to get involved in? We've already mentioned hand stitching and embroidery, but other things related to sewing and sustainability that you might like to try might be natural dyeing, or visible mending techniques, or knitting, or crochet, or patchwork and quilt making, rag rugging, or having a go at zero-waste sewing patterns. Maybe there's been a barrier to entry in the past that you could plan to overcome. Are there some blog posts or YouTube videos out there that could help get you started? A book you could buy or borrow from the library or from a friend? Make some eco-product swaps. There are lots of items you can have fun making that will also help you create less waste going forward, which is a bit of a win-win, isn't it? @StitchAndSew on Instagram says their goal is to sew more reusable products from my fabric stash to reduce my single-use plastic consumption. Items you can make that will replace disposable versions include fabric shopping bags and produce bags, cloth napkins for using at mealtimes, washable sandwich bags, fabric bowl covers for food storage, washable makeup remover wipes, washable sanitary pads or liners, or period pants. And making pouches to contain cutlery, chopsticks, napkins and reusable straws will help you be less reliant on the disposable versions when you're out and about. You could tackle your mending or altering pile. I know that I'm not the only person that is quick to start a new sewing project, but sometimes reluctant to rework or fix an existing garment. And I wrote an entire book on mending and altering, so it's not like I don't know the value or importance in doing it. But mending garments for yourself and your family can be incredibly satisfying when it's done. And as my friend Paula has said to me in the past when she's cleared her mending pile, it's like you suddenly have all these new clothes to choose from. @ChainickCrafts on Instagram plans to make it to the bottom of the mending pile. And @YellowPurpleZebra intends to get better at mending and make it feel creative and not a chore via visible mending. I love how they have reframed mending as a creative pursuit to be enjoyed rather than a chore to get through. Following visible mending or even invisible mending hashtags on Instagram can give you loads of ideas of how to approach a mend if you're feeling stumped. And books like Modern Mending by Erin Lewis Fitzgerald, Mending Matters by Katrina Rodebaugh, or even my own book, Mend It, Wear It, Love It, will give you lots of practical details and tips. Your aim may be to rework, remake or upcycle the items in your wardrobe that aren't working for you. So we've all got items in our wardrobe that we just don't wear anymore and are taking up space. as Carla Bruni explained in episode 22, that should probably trump upcycling in terms of energy use. But if there's no one in your life that would love the item just the way it is and get lots of use from it, then why not try reworking it so it gets more wear? Or failing that, harvest the fabric from it to use in another project. At me_made on Instagram says they want to increase the number of upcycling projects they undertake in relation to the number of sewing projects that uses new fabric. At JM Offskull is altering restyling old clothes, and at Phileas_couture is taking a slightly different take and aims to create with old family sheets that it sounds like are no longer being used for their original purpose. Upcycling and reworking existing garments can give us the opportunity to be creative and problem solve in a way that is different to starting a project with a flat piece of new fabric. And you'll be reducing your impact by not buying virgin fabric so often, which will also save you money. The last goal to discuss is using your existing stash. This was by far the most popular goal among the listeners who responded. Here's a selection. At rocking_bobbin says, I'm going to try and use up what I have rather than buying lots of new fabric and patterns. And lovely at Meg the Grand, guest from last week's episode, offered up not purchasing any new fabric and sewing through all my knit scraps. At Sewing in the Garden says they plan to only sew my stash. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the key to achieving a goal is to be clear about what it is, and therefore to set something specific and actionable. So if your goal is to use your existing stash, what exactly is that going to mean? For example, at Sew Carrie Makes aims to use more fabric than I buy. That's a great one because they could easily keep a note of what they've made throughout the year and of any fabric purchases that they make to keep tabs on whether they're using more fabric than they buy. To figure out the specifics of a using your stash type pledge, it will help to work out if you are an abstainer or a moderator. So these are distinctions coined or at least popularised by the Gretchen Rubin's Happier podcast. Gretchen and her sister Elizabeth often encourage their listeners to work out if they're the type of person who responds better to an abstainer approach or a moderator approach, particularly in relation to cutting out or cutting down of something. The abstainer does better if they cut something out entirely, with a never again, I don't even need to think about that again, or at least until my goal is reached type approach. The moderator does better if they allow themselves a little something occasionally so they don't feel like they're being completely denied and therefore are less likely to jack in the whole goal and fall off the wagon completely. I'm definitely in the moderator camp. If I try to impose a complete ban on myself on something, I tend to feel super antsy rather than relieved. However, I know that many people who reside in the abstainer camp find relief, relaxation and even freedom in the total banning of something. At Also Kathy's goal is to use fabric that I have and not buy any more. So it sounds like Kathy is an abstainer if her plan is to literally not buy new fabric for the year. So if you're going to abstain from buying new fabric and or patterns, depending on your goal, then decide your parameters. Is it until you've sewn through your existing stash? Or for a set time frame, perhaps? If you're going to take a more moderate approach, set yourself up for success by being clear about your plans also. There are various online challenges from which you could take inspiration for the specifics. There was a challenge knocking around on Instagram a while ago that went along the lines of use 4 pieces of stash fabric and then you can buy 1 new piece. Or the Make 9 challenge might be for you. You can pick 9 pieces of stash fabric or sewing patterns if that's what you're trying to use and make sure that 9 gets sewn up by the end of the year. My personal goal is to limit my new fabric acquisitions to 6 lengths of fabric for the year. To me, a length is enough for a garment project, so usually between 1 and 3 metres. In 2021, I either bought or was given about 12 pieces of new fabric, so halving that feels quite significant. I will, however, allow myself the occasional additional piece of new fabric for my kids, and I'm allowed to thrift fabric if I find something suitable. So for the using your stash goal to be achieved, there's kind of an implied ban or limit on acquisitions. So if this is your goal, then have a think about how and when you make purchases. By making a few changes to your habits, you'll be setting yourself up to win. So that your willpower and resolve don't need to be tested too much, you might need to change your route to avoid walking past your local fabric shop. Or possibly by unsubscribing to newsletters or certain social media accounts for a while if they offer unavoidable temptations. Remember that there are plenty other ways to engage with sewing when you can't actually sew, other than shopping for more stuff. Reading sewing books or even the pattern instructions for your next project, or listening to the many sewing podcasts out there are a great way to deepen your relationship with your passion. So if you plan to set a goal to make your sewing more sustainable in 2022, I hope that this episode has provided you with some useful inspiration. If you don't plan to set anything specific, I hope you enjoyed listening and thinking about these ideas nevertheless. If you haven't been in touch already about this topic, I'd love to hear what your goals are. So please drop me an email at zoe@checkyourthread.com or send me a message via Instagram @checkyourthread. I'll happily be your accountability person if that's what you need to make it happen. Happy New Year! Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!